Welcome to the
Perfect.
collaborative. I'm your host, Sydnee Walker. Today we are joined by Shahbaz Khan. Khan is a senior manager of digital content for the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx. He develops and oversees execution of all digital content across the team's online properties. Khan has an impressive background in the professional realm, as he previously served as a digital managing editor for the Sacramento Kings. So thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you.
We always start this off with a few this or that questions. So here we go. Cake or
Cool.
cookies?
I'm gonna go cookies.
I agree. Spring or fall?
I'm gonna say spring because it's closer to summer out here.
Okay. Sweet or salty?
Sweet.
And lastly, car or plane?
Plain for sure.
I agree. I like traveling.
Same.
So what's the first sports memory you have that made you excited to work in sports, whether it was a game you saw or a sport you were involved in as a kid?
Yeah. The earliest sports memories I have are going out to the armory. My dad was in the National Guard, and every day at lunch, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, he used to play with policemen and other guardsmen and people in the force, and they had a huge court. So I would go and I'd see him play full court runs, and they'd have like a little short hoop for me over on the side when I was 4 or 5, and my dad would early on give me the basics of the game, and as I grew up, I just remember that fondly.
Great. And backtracking some with your career, you were a social media associate for the Timberwolves, where
Mm.
you increased their followings on Facebook by 400,000, 95,000 on Twitter, and 108,000 on Instagram. That is quite an accomplishment. What trends did you notice that helped you engage with the community more?
Yeah, interesting question. And looking back on that, those were relatively early days when it came to social media in general. Of course, it wasn't the first year by any means. And obviously, I think it being the early years of kind of social media adoption across the board, that obviously helped a lot. The team being great in terms of getting some new talent at the time, and Zach LaVine and Andrew Wiggins and whatnot, that helped a lot. So I did what I could, but honestly, a lot of it was done from the team itself. But that was a time at which Vine was really growing. So we utilized that a lot for Twitter growth and engagement on that front. And it was a time, if you look back, you can actually probably still Google it, but NBA teams were doing challenges throughout the off season, and you might have remembered they did like NBA cereals. So like you'd name up or you'd name different cereals that correlate to a player and make a Photoshop. So there's a bunch of different interesting stuff going on at the time. Facebook obviously had a lot more reach than it has now. It's more pay to play now. And Instagram was honestly our least engaged with platform. But we tried to do interesting things on that front too. So it's wild to look back and think on how much things have changed during the course of my career. Because I remember, some of the resources we were allocating to aren't as impactful to do now, like Vine, for example.
Right. And now we have TikTok, which is growing even more so.
Yes, yes.
I watched some of your previous interviews, and you mentioned there are some challenges that come along with digital media. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when you're in the industry, specifically within sports, the first one is the barrier to entry, right? Like when I think back to trying to get into this field, it took me a few years before I actually got my foot in the door. And by that, I mean I had applied to the same job every year for 3 years. I had to go outside of sports to really learn. But honestly, in terms of challenges, in terms of being in, once you're in, you got to have a passion for it. It's a lot of long hours. A lot of people talk about the benefits, and there are certainly many. It's why I still love what I do. But if you're not cut out for it, in terms of the hours, and you have to be on top of the trends, like you were alluding to previously. 2 years ago, TikTok was Musically, and I fortunately got to jump on that in Sacramento, but I honestly didn't think anything of it. And at the time, we were putting resources into other mediums, but you have to be knowledgeable on, pop culture, current events. You have to be knowledgeable in terms of platforms. You have to have a willingness to expand your skill set into other means, whether that's photography, whether that's paid, or whether it's trying to be a TikTok expert, which I certainly am not by any means. But I consume way too much content on it now after saying that I would never consume any content on it.
That's a great point. Thank you. And before you made your way back to Minnesota, you worked with the Sacramento Kings, which is another team with a strong online presence. Did you notice anything different in their fan base that changed how you went about creating content?
Yeah, honestly, when I had first taken that job, I was a little bit worried, and by a little bit, I meant a lot, because I grew up as a Timberwolves fan. I'm from here originally. I went and I took that job, and truthfully, I was hesitant to do it because I have such a strong affinity for my home team. It's what I grew and to love the NBA in. So first and foremost, that was a hesitation. But when I had gotten there, I remember I was invited before I actually started working. I drove from Minneapolis to Sacramento, and I was invited by my boss at the time, Jason Wise, who's still over there, does great work, and oversees their team. But I was invited by him to attend a preseason game. And over there in Sacramento, now there's two professional teams. There's a soon to be MLS team, and then there's the Kings. But it was the main go-to in terms of sporting events, right? And so the level of passion that fan base has is unlike. I've been to a lot of different. I've been to every NBA city, and there's very few, I think, that have the aura and the passion that Sacramento has within an arena. It's really unique, and you can sense that everyone and the whole community is in on that one team because that's all they really have. So that's really what I noticed, and based off that, there's when there is just one team, I had to think about the strategy and what I was doing being a lot different from when I was at the Timberwolves, because we're also competing with our college teams. We have every professional sport here, and with all the other teams going on in a local area, there's a lot of competition. So you have to be cognizant of that too.
Right. And you have a unique opportunity of working with the local NBA and WNBA team. What has that experience been like?
When I first got my start, actually, I had been hired by the Lynx first. And so my first experience in professional sports was with the WNBA. And having the ability to do both, it's nonstop, first and foremost, because there really is no off season. Not to say that there was when I was in Sacramento by any means, things were nonstop. But truly here we have NBA, we have WNBA, and now we have the NBA 2K League. So there's something going on at all times. And for me, truthfully, and I think a lot of my staff as well, there's a different appreciation and enjoyment for the WNBA that, quite frankly, isn't necessarily there to the same extent on the NBA end, because the NBA is a pretty established brand, whereas the WNBA it has been making great strides in terms of growth. But that's a challenge to help grow that league, and it's one that we truly look forward to. And I think over the last year, you'll even see if you're just consuming things on Twitter, there's been a large precedent being set towards what the league can get to, and we're happy to be a part of it. It's a really cool league, and I hope to see it grow because the women in the sport do an amazing job selling the game, and I love the WNBA.
Yeah, speaking of that, more people tuned into the virtual WNBA draft this year, such as exciting prospects like Sydnee and Eskew. Do you think it'll be easier to push out more content for the WNBA this year, given there is a season, since more people seem to be tuned in?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think the building blocks have been there, but I think especially last year, again, as I had said, there was an appreciation for the WNBA, especially on social media. And obviously it's a great marketing tool. I'm a bit biased to say that. But truly last year, from a national perspective, you had seen a spotlight put upon the league, I think, unlike ever before. And so, especially with Sabrina coming in and a bunch of young talent and changes across the league, there was some big trades as well. In terms of all of that, I'm very excited to see what's next, not only in this year, but in forthcoming years, because I think the league's making huge strides in terms of viewership and attention that wasn't necessarily there to this extent before, and I hope to see it continue.
Definitely, yeah, it's definitely growing. I know your day-to-day tasks can look different, but what's an example of a year-long goal that you may have in a given season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me now, being in different roles and kind of starting from my associateship where I was very much day to day and more so content capturing from a phone to now overseeing my team, the goals that I try to set forth for both myself and my team tend to be around quality over quantity. And so not only a yearly goal, but a weekly or a monthly goal is benchmarking ourselves in terms of engagement rate, which pretty much equalizes us versus every other NBA team. Because truthfully, right now, we're not going to have the followership of the Lakers. We're not going to have the followership of the Warriors until or unless we amass some hardware. And I hope that is the case sooner rather than later. But until then, we really need to find an equal playing field for us that isn't followership. And luckily, our executives have bought into the strategy that we utilize. And so really, one of my main goals is always trying to be towards the upper top 5 to top 10 of the league across platforms and engagement rate. And then as part of that, ensuring that we are providing quality content on a consistent basis in terms of what we do with our sponsors as well. Because obviously one of the main ways that you monetize through social media and how our department can be of monetary value to the organization is through advertising with corporate sponsors. And so really one of my main day-to-day tactics and what I'm working on a day-to-day is working with our corporate partners to build social strategies that are both beneficial for our partner, but also for our fans. Because really putting out something with a logo on it and tagging a partner just for the sake of putting content out there that you didn't necessarily want to do, it's not necessarily beneficial outside of adding monetary value to an organization. So I want to think about things always from a fan first mentality and perspective and ensure that we're continuing to engage our fan base in the fashion that we would hope to.
And I saw your tweet a few days ago that you guys had some impressive numbers despite tweeting the lowest amount of times within any other organization. What has been you and your team's strategy throughout COVID, just trying to get in as much content as possible and still making it interactive for the fans?
Yeah, truthfully, in terms of the strategy, outside of there being no games, we're treating it essentially as a pretty long off season, right? And so our strategy and our tactics remain the same in that we don't want to forcefully insert ourselves, especially during a trying time in the world. But we want to provide an outlet for fans to be entertained, to engage with something that they miss, because I certainly know I miss the NBA and the Last Dance and each Sunday for the past 5 Sundays were great examples of what's out there in terms of fans missing the league. But really we think about it from that perspective, and unless we're adding value in terms of engaging with our fans or providing them with an outlet, we try not to post unless we feel strongly about adding some value there. So that's kind of the strategy and the tactics. And in terms of the least amount of times that we posted, that wasn't necessarily by default. Obviously, we had during the initial parts of the pandemic, we tried not to necessarily post a ton outside of the initial release from the NBA on games being canceled, and we wanted to take things day by day until we felt comfortable hopping back into things. And then unfortunately, Carl Anthony Towns' mother passing away, we wanted to take some time away as well, and from a digital and social standpoint. So that contributed as well to the fewest amount of times that we posted, amongst some other things. But even looking back throughout the season, our engagement rate was roughly around the same. Before COVID, we were 4th in the league on Twitter specifically in terms of engagement rate. And we posted towards the least amount of time. So some of the strategy and tactics remain the same.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to add in a Last Dance question since you mentioned it. Obviously, I wasn't around during his time, so it was cool to see all that footage. Was there a favorite part of the documentary that stood out for you?
Yeah, for me, the memes. I mean, MJ with the iPad will go down in meme history as he always tends to. So I really enjoyed those. But in terms of the document, I thought it was really well done. I'm a huge photography fan. I actually went out and bought a film camera today, because I've never messed around with that in the last dance, the photography, and there's unlike the stuff you see today. We work with really high-end cameras on my team at least, but there's something about that era of photography that's really unmatched. So I wanted to hope to get into at least a little bit there. Really love that. And I enjoyed some of the insights in terms of MJ's leadership versus other, because it seems that he was a little bit more of a hard leader to work with. But I was certainly interested to hear his insights in terms of how he motivated his teammates and how seriously he took it to be considered amongst the best of all time, if not the best.
Yeah, and that photography was amazing. I remember talking about it. I was like, this looks so good.
No, it's really cool.
So after going through your career so far and knowing what you know now, is there anything you would change?
Truthfully, no. I'm not really one to regret much. I think in terms of if I could look back and give myself some advice, it might just be getting a head start on some of the skills that I've picked up later in my career. For like photography, for example, I didn't pick up a camera until 2015. And now that's probably my favorite part about the job, or one of my favorite parts about the job. Graphic design is one that I've always been able to get by at, but especially during this downtime in the pandemic, I've tried to take some classes and get better on that front. But yeah, for me, not a whole bunch that I would look back and change, because not getting not getting the Timberwolves job, the internship, my first 3 years, pushed me out of sports and gave me some valuable insights to know what I didn't want out of a job, if that makes sense. It taught me a
Mhm.
lot about what I didn't want. And honestly, the failures of not getting it really pushed me and motivated me to get better in other areas that I probably otherwise wouldn't have done if I'd got the job straight away.
Great, thank you. I know there's a lot of steps that it takes before entering a job with a professional organization, but what advice do you have for us that are in college or any young professionals who one day want to work for a professional organization?
Yeah, great question. I think it's somewhat similar to my last answer, but it's get as much experience as you can first and foremost outside of sports, even if you need to. But be persistent. It's very rare. There's few occasions, but that it happens where someone gets what they want right away. But take the failures in stride, and by failures, I all I mean is by not, if you don't get that job right away, use it as a learning experience and focus on the things that you need to get better at, and then network. It really is a large portion. I'm sure you hear it all the time, but networking is key. And truthfully, that combined with the experience that I had the third year that I applied was the thing that got me into the door. So use LinkedIn, use Twitter. Twitter is my personal favorite platform. I've pretty much gotten contacts with every person that I've wanted, in terms of when I was hoping to get a job or insights pertaining to a job from Twitter. So utilize that to the best of your abilities. Utilize LinkedIn, and utilize online learning. I've learned a lot more through YouTube, truthfully, in terms of what I do in my career day to day, and other classes online that I might have during my college career.
Yeah, that's a great point because I know I use YouTube sometimes when I'm using Adobe Premiere and all that stuff. It's
Yeah,
very helpful.
yeah.
And you mentioned relationships. Is there one key person who you kind of stay in contact with now that's helped you throughout your career, or just anyone that helped you early on?
Yeah, I there's a lot of people that have helped me throughout my career. This is definitely not a one-man show by any means, and I'm certainly grateful for them all. I think the person that helped me the most would probably be Jason Wise, who I mentioned previously. Had I not gotten that job at the Kings, and you know, I don't know where my career would have gotten. I certainly don't think I'd be here right now. But being able to have a chance taken on me in that regard. And at the Timberwolves in my first go around, those were both immensely helpful to help me grow as a professional, as a leader, and understand what it takes to hopefully succeed in this industry. It went a long way for me.